So today we have Detective Corporal J.L. Davis with us from the Caldwell Police Department. And I would just like to first ask you sort of what your job entails and what you do. What's a day in the life, real quick.
Okay. Well, I've been in law enforcement for about 14 years,
Okay.
With this department for 13. Currently my assignment is, I'm a detective assigned to our Crimes Against Persons unit, specifically what would be referred to as Special Victims Unit, which includes child abuse victims, victims of sexual offenses, both children and adults, and any other violent crime.
Okay, so this my first book was my own story.
Okay.
My second book is called Hope Givers,
Oh,
and you are one.
thank you.
Because I wrote a whole book about you. So, and many people like you. A lot of people don't realize that Hope Givers really do, our purpose is twofold. A lot of people think that Hope Givers are people that sort of flit about and just sprinkle happiness on people and try to make them want to wrap their arms around life again.
Sure.
But I say a true Hope Giver comes with healing in one hand and a sword in the other, because it is mercy and justice. And if there is not justice for victims of child sexual abuse or any sort of sexual assault, domestic violence, if they don't have justice, then the victim has not been shown the mercy that they need. So I'll probably thank you one more time before we end the interview, but I want to get right to my questions, because I have a lot of people that have a lot of questions about reporting, and so that's why I wanted to interview you, to get your expertise and from that legal side.
Sure.
What are the signs that teachers and counselors, coaches, pastors, neighbors, people in the community of child sexual abuse? And then, so that's what are the signs, but then at what point should a person just pick up the phone and call?
I think with any child, it's going to be different. The important thing is to know the kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're a leader in the community, especially a leader of children, to get to know them very well, know who they are, their families, and is their overall personal traits. When those traits start to change, when you start to notice a child who's normally very outgoing becomes very the opposite.
Withdrawn.
Withdrawn,
right.
Shy, nervous, that would be something to be concerned about.
Would you say behavioral issues? If all of a sudden they have no
right.
track record,
Sure.
no rap sheet, so to speak,
Things,
and then all of a sudden things go south.
When things change,
Right.
drastic changes in personality. Or not necessarily a change in personality, but if a child starts having communication, conversations, acting out sexual things that are not age appropriate.
Right.
You know, little boys sometimes will play with themselves, which is normal.
Right.
But when it goes beyond what's age appropriate, that
Right.
would definitely be concerning.
I just wrote about this, actually, that very thing, in a chapter called Kids Hurting Kids.
Right.
And I talk a lot about the disproportionate, it's disproportionate in power.
Sure.
There's a disparity of power where a child might be older, there might be multiple
Right.
children on a younger child or a smaller child, and the intimidation factor. And I wouldn't suspect then that the you show me mine and I'll show you yours with the little ones
Right.
is anything to be concerned about. And
Right.
I think it's more important not to shame that.
Absolutely.
It's just curiosity, but when there's a disparity of power, at what point should a person pick up the phone?
At any stage, when you start to have that concern, a person is seeing that, and your gut tells you something's not right.
Right.
That's the appropriate time to call.
Yeah.
If you're right, then you may have just saved a child.
Absolutely.
If you're wrong, then we move on and everybody's fine.
Right. And people think that sometimes if you call and make a report and there is really the investigation shows nothing, that maybe someone could come back and sue them for slander or something like that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Under Idaho law, the only time that's going to happen is if you're reporting in bad faith or with malice.
Mhm.
If you're reporting something that you know is not correct maliciously,
Mhm.
then absolutely there could be either civil or criminal penalties.
Okay.
But if you're making this report in good faith because you feel that something's going on,
Right.
you're not going to be in trouble with the law or.
Right, and you probably can't speak to other states.
Right, that's going to be Idaho specific.
Idaho specific.
But most states are going to have very similar
Yeah.
situations.
So what does a person do to report? Take us through
Um,
the process.
So there's two options. You can report to your local law enforcement agency.
Mhm.
Even if the crime is not occurring in your jurisdiction, that
Mhm.
agency will get the information to the correct jurisdiction.
Okay.
In Idaho, anywhere in the state, you can call health and welfare. They have several intake lines, child abuse reporting lines,
Mhm.
and you report it directly to them.
Okay. Like Child Protective Services?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. So
Okay.
they have an intake, and
Mhm.
that person receiving the phone call will immediately get it out to one of the field investigators
Right.
that are involved in that, who then coordinate with law enforcement if it's law
Right.
enforcement appropriate.
I know I've called, as a teacher, I've called, in 26 years, I've made my share of calls. But I know that if I just am generally concerned about a child's welfare, I go the CPS route. If I feel like a crime has been committed, I always call our SRO first.
Absolutely.
And because our school serves two different city propers.
Right.
I don't, yeah. And so he finds out which department I'll be working with. And then I talk to the police and I report the crime
Right.
that I've come by that knowledge of whatever's happened. And then I also call CPS. And I also file a report with CPS
Right.
and tell CPS, I just got off the phone with the police. They know of this,
Yep.
And because I just feel like I don't want to leave it to the police to contact CPS, and I don't want to leave it to CPS to contact the police.
Well, the nice thing
So-
about that, at least in Idaho, my unit, our detective unit, we work very closely with CPS.
Mhm.
Every one of the CPS investigators I have on speed dial, and
Right.
they all know me in the
Yes.
same manner. In Idaho, all reports, whether it comes into law enforcement or to health and welfare,
Mhm.
are required to then be reported to health and welfare as well, to CPS. So even reports that come to us first,
Mhm.
our report very quickly is going to be transferred, or a copy sent to CPS.
Right.
So we're working together in concert.
I think
with all
that's
investigations.
fantastic. You've probably seen a lot in your years
I have.
with the force. What's the fallout if a person does not report?
So in Idaho, technically every adult is a mandatory report. Specifically in statute, it talks about teachers, counselors, medical professionals,
Sure.
Clergy
Mhm.
are mandatory reporters. If an individual who is listed in that statute as a mandatory reporter, knowing something's going on and they fail to report,
Mhm.
there are criminal penalties. In Idaho, it's a misdemeanor, which means you could actually spend time in jail if that's what
Right.
the judge determines.
Okay.
But there are criminal penalties to failing to report if you know.
Right. So what is the fallout if an organization does not report? Because we're seeing this in Michigan State and
Right.
in Penn State, and these are organizations. There's the Catholic Church. I mean, I could just go on there. Our headlines provide plenty
Absolutely.
of material.
In Idaho, the organization is going to be more civil penalties, where the criminal penalties will fall to an individual, typically. So it's important, and a person may need to seek legal counsel, but if you're part of an organization that is trying to protect someone and you know that's happening,
Mhm.
it's a dilemma for you, knowing by law you need to report it, but you
Mhm.
potentially are going to be disciplined by the organization.
Mhm.
It's where good legal counsel would be a good idea. But just to keep in mind as an individual, you are required to report. And regardless of the-
I'm not conflicted at all.
Absolutely.
For that
Most people- I would hope
situation.
most
I'm
people
really
are.
not.
Um,
In fact, my boss, he's the last person I call.
Right.
I call our SRO, I wait for either Nampa or Caldwell to call me back, I report then, I call CPS, I'm on the phone for a long, long time. And finally, at the end of all of it, when I think everybody's done calling me back and getting, the report, and then I call my boss, and I say, I just want to give you a courtesy call that this has just occurred. And my boss is all about it.
Good.
My boss is so great. He's like, good job, Daisy, thank you. And, he's very, very supportive, but you know what? Not everyone has
Right.
that
That's
sort of,
true. I think, at
a
least in
boss.
our area with our county, we have some pretty decent prosecutors.
Mhm.
And I believe if you're to find yourself in that situation where you've reported
Mhm.
because the law says you need to, and
Mhm.
morally you know you should,
right.
And you have some sort of fallout or discipline from your organization,
Mhm.
I think the prosecutor's office in our county at least would protect you or do what they could to
Do what they
protect you.
could to protect. Yeah, and ultimately, if you believe in the divine,
Sure, absolutely,
yeah, something about that grace being sufficient
absolutely.
for you. So we have seen incredibly tragic instances. We're seeing them unfold even now, of religious groups, churches, denominations, and I wanted to ask about this specifically because sometimes child sexual abuse is viewed in that context more as a sin
Sure.
than a crime, and they want to deal with it in-house, as they say, instead of reporting it to the proper authorities, especially when the accused is someone that is very visible in the organization.
Sure.
So as an officer of the law, what would you say to religious organizations specifically whose tendency is precisely that we'll just handle it in-house?
I think it's kind of a difficult question to answer from a local law enforcement perspective. The reason for that is when we have those situations, many times we're going to conflict that case to the Attorney General's office because they have specialty investigators and specialty attorneys that are trained to deal with that issue itself.
Mm-hmm. Is that at the state level?
At the state level, yeah,
Okay.
the Attorney General's office.
Okay.
However, knowing that, what I do know there are some organizations, a couple of churches specifically, that are beginning to recognize what's going on, recognizing their failure in
Mhm.
that area, and they're addressing it.
Yeah.
I actually recently was able to go sit through some training with a large church organization where
Mhm.
their attorneys came in, and the attorney who taught the training actually was a child crimes detective before he went to law school.
Mhm.
He has a very
It's got quite the background.
he's got a lot of knowledge.
Right.
He's very passionate about protecting kids.
Yeah.
And so with his guidance, that religious organization, they have a whole new system that they've, over the
Mhm.
last 10, 12 years,
Right.
they've really repaired things. Very good communication within the church to law enforcement,
Mhm.
information sharing, and they train their clergy specifically. If you have this information, you have to contact law enforcement.
That's right.
And if there's any concern with the clergy, the church will provide an attorney for them to protect the clergy,
Mhm.
obviously, but the number one concern is protect the child.
Right.
So, and that organization is very forward-thinking in that,
Mhm.
and other churches are coming on board, where in the past
Right.
they haven't been.
Right,
So.
and I think I'll just skip the whole commentary on motivation and why that is.
Sure.
I would like to think that people would do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Right.
So, and not because of the liability.
Right.
So, but it is what it is. If kids are getting protected, good.
That's what matters.
I don't care why you do it, I
Right.
just care
Absolutely.
that you do it.
Absolutely.
Right,
Absolutely.
okay. So there, as you know, you've seen this, there are incredibly horrible repercussions that come out of child sexual abuse, as you know. Victims turn to drugs and alcohol, they engage in self-harm and suicide, they drop out of school. How much crime do you think stems from some sort of abuse or some sort of, any kind of marginalization in general?
I think that's very difficult to put a number on.
Yeah.
Simply because it's really hard to go back and tie specific crimes to specific
Sure.
victims. However, we do know we've seen many victims turn to a life of self-medicating,
Mhm.
whether that's with alcohol or drugs or
Mhm.
cutting or
Right.
other things. And anyone who's involved in drug abuse, especially if the drug is illegal to possess in the first place,
Mhm.
they're eventually going to turn, potentially going to turn to criminal activity to feed that
get
addiction,
those,
to
yeah.
continue that self-medication.
Right. It's a
So
desperate
It's a
thing.
absolute desperate cycle.
Yeah.
So where we know it's happening,
Mhm.
without a doubt, there's no question.
Sure.
To quantify it and say, without actually individually interviewing victims, to say,
Mhm.
Where is this coming from, which is something that's going to come out through counseling and as victims start to
Right.
heal.
Right.
So I would say a big number, but I don't think I can
Yeah.
give you a percentage.
It's hard to wrap your head around the possibilities. I know Cory Booker talked, I saw him, he live streamed something that I saw several months ago, and he talked about the largest population of people that are going to prison are women. And he talked about the sexual abuse
Right.
of women and children, and how that's just a pipeline.
Mhm.
It's becoming this pipeline to prison.
I agree.
And do you feel like that's also, do you think that's representative of Idaho?
I think, but I don't know. Honestly,
Yeah.
that one's hard to answer. Having not really worked in the prison system. and,
Yeah,
I
sure.
don't spend a lot of time out there.
Right, right.
Avoid
I think
prison
somebody,
as much as possible.
yeah, I think that somebody needs to do that study.
I agree.
I think that would, I don't know why we even have to argue in this country. Why can't we just do research and let the data inform us as to the best next step, I hope we figure it out soon. So to the victims of these crimes, it seems like the wheels of justice turn slowly. It is a long, long time.
It is.
What does an investigation entail, and what do officers need to have in order to bring charges against a suspect who is molesting children?
So when we have a child victim, commonly the very first thing that's going to happen after the initial, CPS getting involved or the initial patrol officer talking, the interview with the child is going to be very, very minimal, very short, just a basic to see if there's some sort of statement to move forward. Once we have that information, the first thing that's done is we set up what's called a forensic interview.
Right.
Forensic interview is done by someone highly trained to interview children
Mhm.
in a manner that isn't going to re-traumatize them.
Right.
So we go through that interview. If the child makes disclosures, we move forward with the next step.
Mhm.
If the child does not make disclosures, many times you can't really just go off of what we think happened without
Mhm.
having some sort of verbal disclosure or
Okay.
physical evidence to
Or
support,
physical evidence.
support that statement.
Okay.
And so if a child doesn't make any disclosures or we don't have that physical evidence, usually we'll encourage parents, as long as the parents are being protective,
Mhm.
to seek counseling. And if that information comes out in counseling later,
Yes.
through play therapy or whatever versions of counseling are
Right.
available, then we'll readdress it.
Yeah.
Um,
So they can come back to you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Once we have those disclosures, whether
Mhm.
through the forensic interview or through counseling, then the next step is going to be a lengthy investigation.
Mhm.
It will include finding physical evidence if it exists,
Mhm.
interviews with witnesses, suspects, interrogation of suspects, other, multiple methods of getting information from the suspect,
Right.
if possible.
Right.
Once we have all that, the case goes to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor then determines the viability of filing charges, prosecuting, going to trial, all that stuff.
Going to trial, and then you
Right.
have to prepare for trial,
Sure.
and trials get moved up,
Absolutely.
moved
Dates
up.
get changed.
Days get changed all the time.
Evidence gets suppressed, hearings happen. It could be from start to finish, it could be a year, sometimes
Sure.
longer, depending on
On the
the severity
situation.
of the case.
Right.
We're fairly lucky, at least in our county, and within other parts of Idaho,
Mhm.
is because of the research that's been done, even if we can't get a confession from the suspect, many times based on the disclosures made by the child and how
Mhm.
detailed that disclosure is, those many times can be prosecuted without the suspect cooperating and
Mhm.
providing a confession.
Okay.
What happens is if we have a very young child who's able to, in that forensic interview, give details that a child of that age should not know.
Right.
that makes it very easy to move forward, because anybody with a half a thought in their head can
Right.
hear that statement and know
Sure.
that, you know, a 6-year-old child should not know about this and this and this. And
Right.
these things without experiencing it.
Right. There's precious little left
Right.
in the way of an
Right.
explanation.
You know, and many times that child can not only talk about it, but can describe sensations.
Right.
Describe emotions, smells, things
Mhm.
that child at that age should never be able to talk about.
Correct, yeah.
With those kind of disclosures, moving forward, the prosecution can be done without the suspect cooperating.
Right.
So,
Because I
it's very
imagine
beneficial.
you have some suspects that don't
Oh,
cooperate.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, people don't like to talk to the police for some reason.
Yeah, I like the police. There was this like a barrier, I couldn't get here, and I had to ask a police officer, I said, I'm actually trying to get to the police department, and he gave me a roundabout way,
Right.
so. I like the police.
Oh, good.
I think the police are awesome. Idaho has no statute of limitations.
Correct.
For child sexual abuse, and could you explain for our audience exactly what that means?
So, a statute of limitation on any crime is the timeline allowed from the date of the crime to the expiration of when it can be prosecuted.
Right.
For example, most misdemeanor crimes, shoplifting, petty theft, you have about a year.
Right.
After a year, they just can't be prosecuted.
Right.
Most felony level crimes, such as grand theft, you know, stealing a car, financial crimes, typically is a 5-year.
Okay.
So within that 5-year period of when the crime happened, we can still prosecute. Past that, we
Right.
can't prosecute. So in Idaho, with crimes against children, specifically sex offenses, but even with felony level child abuse, with physical abuse,
Right.
there is no statute of limitations.
Right.
20 years later, we can still prosecute this case.
Right.
The downside to waiting that period of time,
Sure.
there's no physical evidence. We may not be able to find the suspect. The child may not remember all the details that would
Right.
be important.
For sure.
So the longer you wait, the possibility of prosecuting successfully is going to
Successfully,
be
yeah.
diminished. But legally,
Right.
the option is still there.
Right. What a conundrum,
Right.
because if a child is being abused at home, oftentimes these victims of these sexual crimes are dependent for their very sustenance
Right.
on the people who are offending them.
Right.
And so maybe something happened 5 through 8. The statute's 10 years. They are still living in that house until they're 18.
Right.
I have a huge problem with the statute of limitations anywhere in this country
Absolutely.
for
On that
sexual
level, right.
crimes
Absolutely.
against children.
I agree.
Because I know I came out with my information and what happened to me as a sophomore in college. Because I had to get out from underneath that oppression and that mind trap and that emotion trap and and the religious trap.
Right.
So it's just not fair. You see what's coming out of Congress right now in sexual harassment cases, where the laws that have been on the books up to now for Congress, who make the laws,
Right.
the pendulum totally swings toward the offender, giving the victim, you have to wait for 3 months because you need to cool off. Oh,
Right.
yeah. So you think that those statutes should just be eliminated
Absolutely.
Nationwide?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. There's got to be somebody on that, somebody, working toward that.
Right.
You'd think,
Well, I do know there are several, both law enforcement and prosecutor association type organizations that push for stuff like that.
Sure.
Just recently in Idaho, the Fraternal Order of Police, which is represents law enforcement officers. Here in Idaho, they've pushed through several bills that are designed at protecting children, protecting victims.
Right.
Successfully gotten those bills through. So
It's a no-brainer for me.
Right.
I would like to just stand in our legislature and say, it's very simple.
Right.
If you want to protect the offender, vote to continue
Right.
the statute, the limitation. If you want to protect children, then get rid of it.
Right. Absolutely.
I don't know why this is hard.
Shouldn't be.
This is not a hard one. Is there a national effort to help monitor and catch child molesters who travel from state to state, like a national registry or some sort of
the sex offender registry is national.
Okay.
Each state kind of monitors, controls their own in-state, but it's very public.
Right.
For example, if I make a traffic stop and the driver is a registered offender, when I run his information through our national database for his driver's status and warrants, things like that, it's going to tell me that he's a registered offender and where he's registered.
Okay.
That's all going to be connected.
Okay.
And so, as far as being documented, it's very easy for any police officer in the country to include Canada. Even though it's not U.S., Canada can get our records as well.
Oh, Canada can get our records.
If a sex offender is driving in Canada and he's pulled over, they have a very similar computer system that we'll share.
Okay.
Mexico, we can't get that information from, but
Okay.
I can get a registered sex offender from Canada if I run his driver's license and vice versa. There's very good cooperation with law enforcement across our northern border.
Fantastic. Yeah.
It's
Well,
great.
people think I'm crazy, but one of the things, well, my first chapter in the book I'm writing is called, Yeah, I'm the Crazy Mom. Because I'm the crazy mom.
Sure.
Because I don't care. And I think that I tell people I am out to eradicate child sexual abuse from the face of the planet before I die.
Good.
People say, you're nuts. I say, I don't care.
Go for it.
I don't care. Are you with me?
Yeah.
You know, because you've heard of Darkness to Light,
Sure.
the organization. That is such, I love that website. I want people to go there. I refer people all the time. And they're kind of on board
Right.
with that whole thing. And I think that we have seen some cultural change.
Sure.
You know? How many registered sex offenders? This is one of those other numbers questions
Right.
that you're not gonna have a specific number, but just generally, how many registered sex offenders just disappear? They just go off the grid, or you know what you just lose them? They flee?
Yes, they leave. The biggest issue we see is a person moving and then failing to register with their new address. Not so much vanishing,
Right.
leaving the country, things like that.
Right.
That's actually pretty rare.
Okay.
But many times they either forget or intentionally fail to register with their new address. One would think, you're a registered offender, you know what you have to do.
That's just, to me, that's like kids saying, oh, I forgot my homework.
Right, right. Yeah. So not that that's an excuse, but no different than, say, you move and you forget to change the address on your driver's license. That's a law, you have to do that.
Right,
Who thinks about it?
right. Well, I kind of do.
I do too.
Okay.
But many people don't. So,
Right, I can imagine.
So as far as offenders falling off the grid, so to speak, it does happen. We have, at least here in our county, investigators with the Kane County Prosecutor's Office whose specific assignment is that, to follow up on sex offenders,
Right.
investigate if they're committing any new crimes,
Right.
if they fail to register, if they do compliance checks.
Right.
They're involved in, Halloween night, they go around and do a lights off check and make sure those offenders are not accepting trick-or-treaters
I
and things
know,
like
and
that.
so that's why we never go out on Halloween, because we don't want the neighbors thinking, like, okay, just come get all this candy.
Right.
What are the consequences for them if they say, whoopsie, I forgot, I'm sorry?
So I believe it is a felony to fail to register. So you could face, from the low end, a probation violation, up to going back to prison.
Yeah.
So.
Especially if you have what do they call that when a sentence is, when they're say, what do they call it? When, you know what I'm talking about? When you get sentenced, but we're gonna let you go home.
Right.
But but we're gonna give you 10 years, but if we'll let you go home, you know what I'm saying?
They're released on to probation.
Okay.
So a probation officer then is in charge of their life for the next however many years their probation's for. And that probation officer works closely with the investigators. And so if you have an offender on probation who's
Mm-hmm.
not following the rules, they're probably going to go back to jail.
Right. My sister-in-law is a lawyer. She used to be a public defender, actually. And she would tell her clients sometimes, dude, just take the 3 years. Because if you go on probation and you violate your probation, you're going for 10.
Right.
And Lord knows you're gonna blow it.
Right.
Just do your 3.
Right.
She
Do your
would
3
she
is
would really tell people that.
Yeah.
What is your advice to parents in regard to keeping their kids safe on social media? And I know, don't we have a training coming up on this,
There's
you
some
and me,
training
up
coming
at
up
the
soon.
Family Justice
Right.
Center? Yeah. And I'm still going to that.
That's tough.
Yeah.
In our current world, our modern society, everybody has a cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
And kids have smartphones, and if you don't allow your child to have a smartphone, their friend has a smartphone.
Right.
So my number one advice is, if you choose to give your child one of these mobile, a smartphone or a notebook or whatever devices are coming out next.
Right.
Number one, be a parent.
Yeah.
Your child is not in charge. And you own that device. I don't care
Yeah.
if the kid saved his allowance and bought it himself. Until that child is 18 years old, you own the device.
Mm-hmm. That's important information
Absolutely.
to have for parents. They got to keep that in mind.
Right. Know the child's passwords.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with once a week, once a day, whatever you feel is right for your family. Get in there and find out what they're doing.
Yeah.
Search it, look through all their apps. There are so many various social media apps that, as a parent, I have no idea.
Sure.
I come across them
New ones every day.
all the time. Things like Snapchat. Pay attention to Snapchat.
Oh, sure.
You know, there's an app called Meet Me that's supposed to be for friends. That's one of the biggest ways that children are being enticed and kidnapped is through those type of apps.
Right. And there are apps, and I'm gonna, gosh, and as soon as I write about all these apps that parents can
There's
use
a new one
to protect their children and see what their children are doing, as soon as this book comes out, there'll just be more, and I have to, I'll have to acknowledge that. It's just this ever-changing.
Yeah, and there are several that are advertised specifically for kids.
Right.
Which is fine, because there are some out there that legitimately are okay.
Yeah.
Just know what your kids are doing.
Yeah.
And,
Show me how this works. Yeah.
Your child, until they're 18, they don't have privacy. There's no such thing as privacy.
Can I just have a high five on that? Because I'm a crazy mom.
Right?
That's exactly
It's
right.
okay.
So, just a couple more questions, and I am just so grateful that you're taking the time to sit down and share this information with the platform that I've built, and I have such great people. I'm surrounded by such great hope givers, and they are going to be so interested in this, and you're just amazing. But I just want to know what do you think your biggest obstacle is in bringing these perpetrators to justice, and then what can we as a society do to help make your job easier? Like, biggest problem, how can we help?
One of the biggest problems we see, and it's not just here locally, it's nationwide, when these cases go to trial, or this could be a 20-minute dissertation. Number one, don't be afraid of jury duty. It's one of those things that nobody likes it. Nobody wants to get called for jury duty. And what we're seeing across the country is not only the fate of the defendant, but overall justice for the victim and the defendant.
Right.
Maybe the defendant is truly innocent.
Right.
And that defendant deserves the same level of justice. But what's happening is that those people's fate or the outcome of that trial are being determined or decided by a group of 12 people who just weren't smart enough to get out of jury duty. And we don't want that. We need intelligent people on juries, people that can listen and pay attention to evidence, to facts, to listen and truly understand what's going on. Not that somebody who's not educated is a bad person, but what we're getting is people that just haven't figured out how to get out of it. people who are.
I haven't figured out how to get out of it.
Well,
because, and teachers will always, I feel like teachers, if you, what do you do for a living? I'm a teacher. Yep, she's on there,
right,
you know.
right. And that's a lot of it as well.
Well, because, and because our districts will still, like, we're not going to lose wages,
Right.
I think, too, you know, and
Right.
so.
And that's, you know, that's something that should be looked at for every profession.
Right, from it, yeah.
You know, employers, organizations, governments need to understand that while jury duty it can be a burden, it can take you away from work.
Right.
You know, I'm very busy. If I have to take time off from work, that means I'm going to work extra hours next week.
Right.
And that's the life of everybody. Nobody's
Right,
exempt from
sure,
that.
exactly, exactly.
But to have organizations understand that not only is this a requirement, I mean, this is a civil requirement to be a citizen of the United States.
Right.
Everybody talks about their rights, but nobody worries about their responsibilities.
Thank you. And sacrifice.
Right, and that's, it's part of what our founding fathers set up, is to be, you're part of the community. And while nobody wants to go in there and hear the stories of child abuse, it's your responsibility as an American
Right.
to be there, to be educated, to be willing to listen, to sacrifice your own time. And if that means a person's going to lose money, then at the risk of sounding like a socialist, that employer needs to step up and go ahead and pay them anyway.
Right.
Because they're doing their civic requirements.
Right,
To be
and making the world a better place.
Absolutely.
I have been on a jury before, and I have been rejected because it was a child abuse case.
Sure.
And they asked, how many of you have been abused as children? My hand went up, and they let us all go. I was probably there for a second.
Right.
I went back to work.
Right.
They're not gonna take, and
Right. Many times.
those are the well, I can't say that. I can't say those are the ones I'll be on those juries
Right.
because
Right.
yeah. And I've just described why I was let go.
Sure. Oh,
because
sure.
it has to be impartial.
Right.
And no, I think I've built enough I built some momentum in this that that was not gonna happen.
Right. So, I think the other important thing is too many times, and this not only applies to child abuse, but just in general, but most importantly to child victims, is too many people are willing to report something, but they don't want to be involved after their initial report. The most basic concept is you're driving down the road, you see a car swerving, you're going to call it in for a DUI.
Sure.
Who wouldn't do that?
Right.
But then once the traffic stop is made, well, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to go to court and testify what I talked about or what I witnessed.
Yeah.
You know, and while something like a DUI is frequent, someone who is learning of or witnessing or learns of a child abuse case, how common that is for them to say, well, you know, I want to report it, I want somebody to do something, but I don't want to be involved. I don't want to know what happened. I don't want to, you know, I don't want their parents to be mad at me if I was wrong. You know.
Right.
And that's where the biggest help would be, you have to be involved, because this is a kid.
Thank you. I love that answer. I love that answer. At the end of our lives, let it be known. Let it be known
Okay.
what we did, where we stood, who we protected.
Absolutely.
And it does cost to be a hope giver. It costs a lot. You sit with people in their suffering. And, you know, when I go speak at churches, I try to recruit hope givers. Like, and I have a terrible message. No, you need to sit with people in their pain for however long it takes. And you need to share in their suffering.
Sure.
You need to share in their suffering, because that is where the hope and the healing begin. And just walk that journey with them. But I'll tell you, I have spoken like at NNU for social workers and therapists. I kind of have to change my shtick, you know, a little bit. You know, I have to change it up because I don't have to recruit them.
Right.
They're already
They're
on
there.
board.
Right.
And so I just thank them and I celebrate them and I thank you And I just want to celebrate the work that you do. It is, it's hard. There is a toll that it takes. It is a sacrifice
Right.
to be a hope giver. So count the cost, but you have.
Yep.
So thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
I appreciate you and the work that you do.
Thank you.
And I will let you know when this comes out.
Cool.
Okay? Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
All right.
All right.